Hello everyone, Leaf Reed here, and today we have a classic, The Call of Cthulhu, and Other Weird Stories by H.P. Lovecraft. Yes, the book that seems to be the center of contemporary talk and discussion. So a bit about just H.P. Lovecraft, just to fill you in. So H.P., and I wish I actually knew what H.P. stood for. It's not Hewlett Packard, I can tell you that. But he lived, he's an American author, lived in the early 1900s or so. He was married once, and apparently his wife left him because the relationship wasn't working out. And H.P., or just Lovecraft, he wrote for a local paper or journal, and I believe that the paper that he wrote for was it was called, I forget what it is exactly, but it's the term for pulp fiction, that the paper that was printed on was very pulpy and very sensational, and there was very cheap paper to use, which is where the term pulp fiction comes from. And so he would post his daily stories in this local paper. And it was essentially his take on the horror genre, which in the early 1900s was not a thing, and specifically in cosmic existential dread. So very advanced, ahead of his time, etc. And really he was not popular or well-liked or well-known, I think, in his time. And it was only after his death that his friend or something publishes papers as a whole collective that he actually became much more popular, especially in recent years. So you might have seen Cthulhu depicted as a giant squid guy with squid tentacles, and that's a way to depict him. But the concepts in Lovecraft's work are really just fascinating. There are a bunch of other, so really it was a series of short stories and horror stories. And some of these revolve around, I think there's one that's called In the Walls, which is about a bunch of rats in the walls, and you tear down the wallpaper, and there's actually a doorway to a hidden underground city or something. Very eternal darkness, you know? Oh my God, The Shadow over Innsmouth. There's one where he talks about, he goes to this town in England, and it's by the ocean, and all the people have these fish-like features, like their eyes are bulging out, they have big, thick lips, and it turns out they're all actually part fish, and they've all come out of the ocean. And I think, is that part of the Cthulhu story? But I can't remember exactly. But the Call of Cthulhu story is, the beginning of it takes place in rural Louisiana in the swamps, and there's a bunch of people doing this ceremony, and the local police force kind of finds them, puts a stop to it, and they're all chanting this song and this ceremony, and they have this book called the Necronomicon, and you might recognize that term. The Necronomicon is a book which means, I believe it's Latin for Book of the Dead, and that actually has no precedent. HP just thought this up. It kind of very, very interesting that I always thought the Necronomicon was an ancient thing that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. No, HP just thought it up in the early 1900s. It just is a thing. The made up terms and words that HP Lovecraft uses have been featured in a bunch of media, video games. One that comes to mind that isn't exactly obvious is the Quake series, specifically Quake 1. I believe the final boss is called Nelithicougar or something like that. They're all very impronounceable names and just crazy random syllables and consonants, and they're used for elder gods of these unpronounceable, unknowable horrors. And that really goes into the idea of what Lovecraft's idea of horror was. And if you just give me a moment, I want to find, because the Call of Cthulhu is a good story, but I actually like another one of his stories better. And so my favorite one, I believe this is the right one, I'm not totally sure, but there's one called The Whisper in the Darkness. And what this entails is, I can't remember, this is northeast United States, and there's a relay of messages between this man and his friend, who has been studying these cosmic patterns in the sky or something. But basically, he comes to go find him because he's invited him over, and he's basically been killed in order to be found. And these aliens, basically, in the early 1900s, have found him and killed him, and they live up in these remote mountains. So it's like they live in this area where, you know, these mythological creatures are. They're not entirely sure, you know, what they are. And he slowly uncovers this between, you know, the traces of his letters, the bloodstains, the dogs. It's very much like a horror video game-esque, where you're finding the logs of the person and you're uncovering the truth slowly, methodically, and carefully. And what he pieces together, that there are these creatures that honestly, they remind me of the certain enemy in the Fallout series, where they have these giant tentacles coming out of their mouth and they walk on all fours and they have like a human head but not the rest of the body. And so the idea is they come down to this house and they just abduct humans or animals or flesh to eat or to just scavenge or study. I'm not sure if they actually study it, and then they go up and they take it back to the Great Ones, which is like these giant living gods that just live out in deep space, that don't need oxygen or atmosphere or light to survive. And the way this story characterizes the intent of these evil creatures is that they are simply part of nature, cosmic nature, and they are just so indifferent to humanity that they don't even like care, in the same way that a human would regard ants. Like, oh yeah, I might kill a few of these, but it doesn't matter, it's whatever. And so that's really where Lovecraft's horror comes in, is that there's this thing that is so beyond your understanding, so immense, so intelligent, that it doesn't even perceive you as a threat or even as a living being. It just, like, you are just so beneath it that it could just kill you and not even care about it. And that's the real big difference, is that there's something out there that is not malevolent necessarily. It's just like a giant squid or a predator. It's just this giant thing that just consumes, and it doesn't have any malevolence toward you because it's so beyond your understanding. And you're just kind of filled with this dread that you're just on a rock floating in the cosmos and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think that's Lovecraft's main essence of horror. It really captures it perfectly, that you could be faced with a horrible premeditated murder or death or whatever, and it's nothing personal. It's just the way it is. And I think, I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly because I'm just kind of flipping through, but I think the creatures also like would consume the skin of the people and then like speak as if they were speaking through them. Like, I don't know, there's this one part where he says, arrangement satisfactory, we'll meet train Wednesday. Don't forget record and letters and prints. Keep destination quiet. Expect great revelations. Anyway, so there's just, yeah, I think that story does it best. The Call of Cthulhu, however, I'll go back to that story. I should have finished that one. But basically, the Louisiana police, they break up this ritual. They find the Necronomicon and they put it in, I don't know, the storage or evidence locker. And what happens is the police force that have broken this up, the main character is a cop, and he starts going home and having dreams. And every night he dreams of the imagery described in the Necronomicon, and he dreams of this giant underwater city at the bottom of the ocean, and he dreams of Cthulhu. And it's weird, and he dreams every night more and more intense things, that Cthulhu is real, and that he lives in this underwater city. And in this underwater city, it's filled with these cyclopean architecture. So lots of holes and rings and loops and whatever in this very Atlantean kind of environment. And the idea is that the more they think about Cthulhu, the more they dream about Cthulhu, they realize that Cthulhu is actually asleep. But the more they think about him, the more energy and power they give, and the more they dream, the closer Cthulhu comes to being awakened. And it's such an interesting concept that this god is literally composed of the people's intentions toward it. In the same way, if you had a bunch of people pray to some random thing, it could actually manifest. And Cthulhu is basically asleep at the bottom of the ocean, and Earth has been its domain and its home for millennia, and it's just been sleeping this whole time, and until someone found this book, and it hasn't been able to awaken and control reality, and the dream world and the real world cross over. And that's one of the coolest ideas I've ever heard of. I'm sure Carl Jung would be very interested in something like that. But it's a fascinating concept. Also, the way Lovecraft writes is pretty decent. It's not anything super amazing, but I think it's good enough for the kind of content that he's creating. And there's kind of an example of the font and whatever. So again, the concepts in the book are just so fascinating and serve as a milestone or a bar for not only cosmic ideas, but also cosmic horror, which is his own genre, really. I mean, it's amazing he made his own genre out of this, but he did. Anyway, that's H.P. Lovecraft. The other stories in this book are okay. Besides The Whisper in the Darkness, which I personally think is better than Call of Cthulhu, I love that story. The rest of them are just kind of whatever. It is nice, though, that if you want to understand Lovecraft, it's literally a short story. It's not a whole compendium of different Cthulhu novels or one giant Cthulhu book. It is like one short story and a bunch of other stuff if you want. That's optional. So in that case, it's very easy to read. It's pretty fun to read, and just not bad. But yeah, I give it a shot. It's nice and short and easy to read, so go for it. What else can I say? Anyway, guys, as always, keep reading.